All right, I think we've given a couple of minutes for a few more people to join, and others will continue to come in the next few minutes. So I think in the meantime, I'm going to start by welcoming everybody here today to our side event addressing marine wildlife trafficking to protect our oceans. This side event is part of the UN Ocean Conference that will take place next week in Nice. And today we also celebrate World Environment Day, as well as the fifth anniversary of the launch of the Global Initiative to End Wildlife Crime, which is co-hosting this event. So it's a really commemorative day. And just to introduce myself, my name is Anna Mottemayor. I am the policy officer at the Global Initiative to End Wildlife Crime and the executive officer at the International Council of Environmental Law, which is the other organization co-hosting this event. I will be today's moderator for the session, and we will be recording it and making it available afterwards. So on behalf of the Global Initiative to End Wildlife Crime and the International Council of Environmental Law, I would like to extend our gratitude to our partners that are supporting us in hosting today's event, which are the ADM Capital Foundation, the Born Free Foundation, and Freeland Foundation. I would also like to begin today's session by thanking all of you that are joining us online. There will be a Q&A at the end, so please stick around so you can get to ask questions to our panelists. We will start with some opening remarks from John Scanlon. I think he is probably known to all of you here, but just to introduce him, amongst his many current roles, he is the chair of the Global Initiative to End Wildlife Crime. He's also the chair of the UK government's Illegal Wildlife Trade Challenge Fund, as well as the executive president of the International Council of Environmental Law. He is the former Secretary General of CITES, where he served from 2010 to 2018. So I think we can all agree that he's very uniquely placed to open today's side event. So please, John, you have the floor.
Great. Thank you very much, Anna. And big thanks for moderating today's event. And I'd like to join you in warmly welcome everyone who's joined us this morning or this evening online, and to wish you all a very happy UN World Environment Day. Now, as Anna mentioned, it was 5 years ago today that a small group of us formally launched the Global Initiative to End Wildlife Crime. It was done virtually because it was in the middle of the COVID lockdowns. And it followed a soft launch that we had at the UK House of Lords just 3 months earlier. Now, our initiative has as one of its core objectives advocating for a new global agreement on preventing and combating wildlife trafficking. And we're of the view that such an agreement should take the form of a new protocol under the UN Convention Against Transnational Organised Crime. Now, as you may know, there are already 3 existing protocols under this convention, namely against the trafficking in persons, migrant smuggling, and firearms trafficking, but there are currently no protocols on any environmental crimes. Now, we started out with a small handful of organisations back in 2020, and we've since grown to 50, including 45 international champion organisations and a global network of technical advisors. And today, what I'd like to do in making these brief opening remarks is to draw your attention to 3 aspects of our initiative. Now, firstly, we define wildlife to include all wild fauna, flora, and fungi, that is animals, plants, and fungi. And this means that we cover 3 of the 9 crimes identified by the UN Office of Drugs and Crime as environmental crimes, namely fishing, timber, and wildlife crimes. But we don't disaggregate them. Rather, we treat them all as wildlife crimes. Now, our approach of having an inclusive definition of wildlife is based upon a fundamental logic. A wild fish swimming in the ocean is as much a part of its ecosystem as a tree growing in a forest or an elephant migrating across the savannah. They are all wildlife. Secondly, while we advocate for an agreement that covers wildlife trafficking, as far as we are concerned, a new protocol or protocols can include as many crimes that affect the environment as states prefer, such as illegal mining, provided that wildlife, as broadly defined, is covered. And thirdly, we encourage states to make it a criminal offence to import any wildlife or wildlife product into a country if it has been acquired in contravention of the national laws of the source country. Now, the reason for saying so is simple. It is not okay to steal a country's wildlife just because it is not one of the 40,000 species, that's out of the world's 8.7 million species, that is listed under the international agreement known as CITES. And this is of particular relevance to marine species. If a country has decided to protect its wildlife, then this should be respected by everyone, whether a particular species is listed under CITES or not. Yet this is a serious blind spot in the current approach. Now, when we launched our initiative back in 2020, I must say we got a slightly lukewarm reception from some quarters. But things have changed significantly over the past 5 years, and let me share with you just a few examples. We've seen extraordinary leadership from the presidents of Angola, Costa Rica, Gabon, and Malawi, who each made a powerful call for a new protocol on wildlife trafficking between 2021 and 2022. Then Angola, Kenya, and Peru took this call one step further in May of 2022 when they presented a groundbreaking resolution to the UN Crime Commission that mandated a process to glean states' views on the possible benefits of a protocol. And a clear majority of the states that responded were supportive or open to the idea. And last year, Brazil, France, and Peru successfully took a resolution to the UN Convention Against Transnational Organised Crime, COP12, that has led to the establishment of an intergovernmental expert group to explore the possibility, feasibility, and merits of any additional protocol to the Convention on crimes that affect the environment, including on wildlife trafficking. And then just last month, Brazil submitted a resolution to the UN Crime Commission on illicit trafficking in species of wild flora and fauna and illegal mining and illicit trafficking of precious metals that was adopted by consensus. Colleagues, as you can see, there is some wind in the sails for taking bold steps to bring wildlife trafficking and other crimes that affect the environment within the international criminal law framework, which is exactly where they need to be. Yet in many of these discussions and processes, we see a gap, namely the omission of references to marine wildlife, including fish. We need to be sure that marine species are not left out of the discussion. And this is something that our initiative is striving to achieve, including through today's event. Illegal exploitation of marine wildlife, including fish, is different from unregulated or unreported exploitation. The trafficking of marine wildlife needs to be tackled through the international criminal law framework, along with other wildlife crimes. Now, how this is best achieved is an open and ongoing discussion, including through the Intergovernmental Expert Group established under the UN Convention Against Transnational Organised Crime that I referred to earlier. Now, today we have an outstanding panel of expert speakers to take us through some of the current challenges and why we need to include the trafficking of marine wildlife into the discussions that will take place next week in Nice and under the UN processes that are currently underway. So I'm really looking forward to hearing from each of our expert speakers. And following today's World Environment Day event, we will be issuing a statement directed to next week's UN Oceans Conference. With that, I thank you and hand back to you, Anna.
Thank you very much, John, for providing that context into the progress that has been achieved so far towards the creation of an additional protocol to the UNOC covering wildlife trafficking, and also for highlighting that trafficking of marine species is often not included or addressed in this context. So thank you for your remarks. We will now hear from Daniel Cacho-Rees. He is an expert on oceans, fisheries, wildlife law, and he is a member of the IUCN World Commission on Environmental Law, as well as the technical support group of the Initiative to End Wildlife Crime. His previous roles include being the executive director of a nonprofit law firm and the marine species officer at the CITES Secretariat, where he worked together with John. So I'm going to hand it over to Daniel.
Thank you so much, Anna. And thanks for the kind introduction to you and John. Let me just quickly share. You should be seeing a blue screen now.
That's good.
And now you should be seeing my presentation.
Yeah, that's working great.
Perfect. So yeah, thanks a lot, John, also for already setting the scene. I'll pick right off where John started. There's a the negative impacts of wildlife trafficking are widely recognized, including through UN General Assembly resolutions. There's no agreed definition, but for this purpose, I'll use the one from the UNODC Guide on Drafting Legislation to Combat Wildlife Crime, which is that trafficking shall mean the import, export, transport, sale, receipt, introduction on the sea, acquisition, possession, purchase, delivery, movement, or transfer of specimens of wild fauna and flora. And from those that are on the panel and also some in the audience that know CITES, it's really cool to see introduction from the sea here. And the lens through which I will look at this now is, as John mentioned in his introduction, the discussions under UNOC on a potential fourth protocol, including on wildlife trafficking. CITES was mentioned a few times already, and there are many conversations to be had about how the implementation of CITES for marine species could be strengthened. And I hope that some of the other panelists will touch on those with their rich experience on working on CITES on some of these issues, but that's not going to be the focus of my presentation today. When we talk about wildlife trafficking, I gave you a definition of trafficking. The other part is wildlife. And as John mentioned, if fish are included in that term, varies a lot by national legislation. There's a great paper by Tanya Wyatt, who leads research on environmental crime at UNODC on whether different legislation includes fish explicitly or implies it, but then also some cases where it's excluded. And the first takeaway here would be that in order for work towards combating wildlife crime in the criminal law framework, in order for that to deliver benefits to our work to conserve and sustainably use marine species, of course, marine wildlife needs to be included, and fish needs to be included in that definition. So when looking at the last World Wildlife Crime Report by UNODC in 2024, you can see in the diversity of species recorded in the seizures that there are a number of marine taxa, for example, corals making up 16%, bivalves and mollusks, turtles and tortoises, sea snails, sturgeons and paddlefish that are being recorded in seizures. But there's two things I want to draw your attention to here. Some of these species groups are CITES listed or include species that are CITES listed, but many others don't have CITES listings. And also a big gap that you would expect to, or a big, something you would expect to see here, but that isn't here, is fish, other than sturgeons, paddlefish, or caviar. And so one of the things that the World Wildlife Crime Report recognizes is that there are important gaps in seizure-based evidence of trafficking in timber, fisheries, and some other large trade sectors, because they're treated separately and differently, which of course is a big problem. So why has it been so difficult, or what are some of the reasons why illegal fishing has been treated separately? And I think one of the most important things to mention is the concept of IUU fishing, which is how in the fishery sector, a lot of these discussions and that's the headline under which those discussions take place. There's no great definition. It clearly includes illegal, unreported, and unregulated. And both the unregulated and unreported imply that not all activities covered under the term are illegal. But the FAO, International Plan of Action on IUU, has a definition that that places all of these activities outside established legal and management frameworks, recognizes that they make it harder to achieve effective management, at the very least due to missing data, but also including fishing methods that are banned for outsized environmental impact or targeting of protected species or violating special protection measures. And so it's fair to say that all of IUU fishing is undesirable, but not all of it is illegal. And in order to apply this, first of all, in order to figure out what of it is illicit trafficking, we need to find a lens that tells us what within IUU falls under illegal. And then a next step is, because something is illegal doesn't necessarily mean that it falls under the criminal law part of countries' approach to penalizing it. Some of it also carries civil or administrative penalties. And so those are two lenses that we sort of need to go through to figure out how can we use criminal justice, criminal law approaches to tackling IUU fishing. And for CITES listed species, that's relatively simple because international trade either needs to be legal, proven through a legal acquisition finding, and reported in the annual trade report. And through that is regulated for Appendix 2 species in a non-detriment finding that where the scientific authority of a state proves that it's sustainable, or it is illegal. But as John mentioned, this does not cover the many species, and we've seen some in the CETA database, that are not covered in CITES. And so some of the considerations that states could make here are, for example, if species are in violation of national laws of source countries. The fact that a species isn't listed doesn't make it okay if an actor from one state takes it from the source country and then sells it in the country where it's landed or trafficked to. And then also a slightly more tricky consideration is there might be applicable international frameworks like the Convention on Migratory Species or regulations under regional fisheries management organizations or CITES introduction from the sea that once you think about fisheries become relevant. And of course, those laws would not directly apply to an actor, but they would apply through the national laws of the state that has jurisdiction over the activity. So for example, the flag state, unless the protocol makes a direct reference to international law, and then it would be directly applicable. So when we think about what species, for which species or for what activities, is it severe enough to think about applying this stronger criminal law framework? There are many endangered species, of course, this is not to scale, that are not protected at all. That's a green bubble. Then there's a bigger number that is nationally protected, but not internationally protected. That's a yellow bubble. And then the red is the few CITES listed endangered marine wildlife. And this is where as I said, where the distinction is the easiest at the moment, at least in terms of determining what is illegal versus what is IUU. Another thing to consider is the activity basis. So what if something is not endangered, but is harvested in a manner that has an outsized environmental impact and therefore is, for example, illegal under a national law of a coastal state, or illegal through an international measure that the flag state has implemented international law. So my main takeaways would be efforts to improve the international response to wildlife crime should explicitly extend to trafficking of marine wildlife, including fish. It should include trafficking of marine wildlife that is not listed under CITES to support source countries' domestic protections. And there's also a possibility to strengthen international frameworks if they are directly mentioned. And a new protocol under UNTOC or a new instrument could help delimitate among those activities that are legal, which of the activities meet that threshold to be criminalized and justify the application of the criminal justice and criminal law framework. And then also using UNTOC's provisions on mutual legal assistance, training and technical assistance to provide a platform for cooperation to advance how much impact these approaches can make on, in the end, the larger purpose of the conservation and sustainable use of the ocean. I hope that was helpful and looking forward to questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Daniel. That was a very clear and very thorough explanation. Very thankful that you helped us understand how we have arrived at having this vulnerable status for non-CITES listed species, marine species, and also for reminding us as well how protocol to the UNTOC can address the current shortfalls in the international legal framework. So thank you. That was all very, very good explanation. I will now turn to Dr. Yvonne Sadovy. Yvonne is a researcher and was previously a professor at the University of Hong Kong for 30 years. Her research and communication focus is in fisheries biology, conservation, and the management of coral reef fishes, with a strong interest in threatened species and vulnerable life history attributes, as well as sustainable use and trade. Yvonne has also founded and she co-chairs the IUCN Groupers and Wrasses Specialist Group, and she is the Executive Director of Science and Conservation of Fish Aggregations. I'll now hand over the floor to you, Yvonne.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Anna, can you hear me okay and see?
Yeah, we see your slides as well.
Thanks very much. So it really is a great pleasure to be a part of this important meeting. And my sort of approach is very different. What I've done here is to dive into the depth with one particular species. It's a CITES listed species. It should be amongst the easier ones to manage. It's very easy to distinguish. It's traded by very few parties. It's been CITES listed for on Appendix 2 for over 20 years now. And why I want to present this is because I think there's a lot to be learned in terms of the devil in the detail of how actually things play out. And I think one thing that's very clear is that even under these circumstances, there's still a need for more tools and more protocols. So even in this apparently fairly ideal situation, where we should be seeing greater controls and positive impacts for the species, there's still a need for more. So that's sort of my bigger framework here. So just a bit of background on the species. It may not be so familiar with people, but the relevant background is that the major threats are that there's IUU fishing and trade. There's illegal trade going on, and the fish is largely traded for the international luxury seafood market. It's one of the most valuable species in that market. Currently, the major traders are Indonesia as a source country, mainland China, Hong Kong, SAR as major demand centers, with Hong Kong as a major trade hub as well. So that's the current situation, but these things do change. The species was listed on CITES Appendix 2, 2004. It's endangered according to IUCN red list categories and criteria that was reassessed this year. And it's one of few marine species on China's Class 2 list of endangered and protected species. So there are a number of measures in recognition of its status. It's an uncommon species in the field. In the graph, you can see in the map, rather, you can see the distribution of the species around the reefs. That's the red areas of the Indo-Pacific, and the arrow shows the major sort of route of trade. The species gets to over 1.5 meters. It's a very large reef fish, but most of the trade is in juveniles, the center picture, which are less than 1 kilogram. So here we have a kind of fishery of juveniles. And often, by the way, it's not recognized that these little ones are the same species as the big ones, and that has sort of implications with awareness and what have you. So post the CITES listing in 2004, there was substantial work on the species. And again, this is of interest because for many of the species we might be concerned about, there's not nearly as much information available. But again, this is an interesting case study because there is a lot of information. And there was a lot of work by NGOs, IGOs, government, academics. There was an FAO-led non-detriment finding. So following the CITES listing, field studies in major source countries for determining export quota, of which Indonesia was the only one to enact it. The other two countries do not export the species. Many publications have come out. There are regular retail trade surveys in Hong Kong, so we're kind of seeing what's actually in the retail trade. And there were workshops to raise awareness of this relatively unknown species and capacity in both Indonesia and Hong Kong. So quite a lot of background work over the last 20 years. So I think it's very interesting to see what has come out of that and what the current situation is, and obviously relevant to the current discussion. So initially, all animals are caught from the wild. And initially, all of the exports were under the CITES classification of wild. It's a production code. There are different production codes under CITES. And following the listing and applying of a quota, exports initially declined by more than tenfold. So the trade really was reined in, and a lot of attention was paid to it, both in Hong Kong and in Indonesia. And many countries actually decided, because of the status of the species, or because they felt not able or wanting to go the NDF route and continue exports, they actually banned the export of the species, about 10 of them, or increased management locally. So there was a kind of positive outcomes, I would say, for the species at least. But what we've seen, Indonesia is a major exporting country, but what we've seen when we've conducted underwater visual sensor surveys over a decade is there's no detectable recovery. We have seen that there's no further declines, but there's no yet detectable recovery, which points to the need for further measures and to address some of the problems which I'll identify in a minute. We do see adults and healthy populations in protected areas, which is very encouraging, but where exploitation continues, there are populations continue to be much reduced. A second production code, ranching, R under CITES, was introduced in 2018, so just under a decade ago. That was introduced without an NDF and resulted in an increased export quota. There's a whole history behind that and reasons for it, but the point I really want to make here is that the introduction of ranching has actually caused some major problems in the control of trade because of the way ranching is perceived as being more like farmed animals, more like captive animals than wild taken animals. So this is a perception again. It's like this perception about fish aren't wildlife. It's a perception about what ranching actually is, when it is still wild taken animals, which need to be subject to an NDF to ensure that their take is at a sustainable level. So this was kind of one of the lessons that we've learned. We've also learned with this species that depending on the mode of transport, the trade is more or less controllable. So vessels which carry live fish, and this is exports are by vessels as well as by air. In Indonesia, they did try to address some of the problems associated with wild trade versus ranch trade by controlling the trade according to the controlling the trade by the mode of transport. So ranch could only be by sea, and wild could only be by air. So there was an attempt there. But what we saw was that illegal wildlife trade declined with the species, but then increased. And it decreased because of the increase in ranched trade. So notwithstanding the positive measures, IUU was worsened by the introduction of ranch. Unfortunately, the controls, particularly on live carrier vessels, was one of the problems there. And the detailed work that was done identified legislative loopholes, which, again, these are the kind of things that protocols or additional tools could deal with. And 8 CITES decisions were issued to address some of these issues, but 7 were deleted without full resolution. So there's a concern there about how CITES works in this case. So just to finish, there are ongoing conservation concerns about the species. There are a lot of illegally small fish that get exported from Indonesia, illegal according to their size regulation for the species. W and R fish are indistinguishable, and the suspected laundering of illegal imports replacing legal imports in Hong Kong. So the solutions would be to address the legislative loopholes, retain those decisions of CITES until they're resolved, improve vessel oversight, address the issues and problems associated with the ranching source production code. Communication amongst authorities would be very beneficial, and then the possibility of considering CITES review of significant trade or Article 13 to address some of the problems. And then the use of new tools, and I don't have time to introduce, but I can talk about it later. We're using facial patterns as sort of fingerprinting to enable the identification of individuals in place of tagging. So we don't want to, they're not tagged. You can't distinguish legally imported fish, but we're developing this tool where we should be able to do that. So thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you so much, Yvonne. These were very insightful remarks, and also for illustrating that the impact that CITES listings can have on marine species, which even if it comes with a lot of positives, that we do have to keep in mind that there will still be a need for action afterwards, and that there are legal loopholes still that need to be addressed. So thank you for that. We can come back to some interesting questions later, I'm sure. For now, I'll turn to Stan Shea, who's also joining us he's joining us from Hong Kong today. He is the Marine Program Director at Bloom Association Hong Kong and at ADM Capital Foundation, where he spearheads research projects that address knowledge gaps of the local live reef food fish and dried seafood trades, as well as marine biodiversity. And they provide critical information to inform efforts for the conservation of marine resources and habitats. So Stan, you have the floor.
Thank you, Anna. So I believe you can see my slides.
Yeah, it's working well.
Perfect, thank you. So when I saw this, the shark fin city, Hong Kong, or I would actually call it a shark fin capital. And then what does that mean? If you look at the global scale, this is like the past trade data that more than 125 countries or places, they have been exporting fins to Hong Kong in the past data. So the scale is big, it's like global scale. And if we look at like comparison to the region, so we compare Hong Kong, Taiwan, China, Singapore, and Japan, and then what you can see up to the most recent update, we are still one of the biggest importer for the shark fin trade. And then if we look at the volume of the trade, if you look at, people talk about, yes, there was a decline from 2012, but if we look at the decline up to 2021, we are still talking about 2,000 metric tons of the fins coming into Hong Kong every year. Remember, no carcass, no like just talking about the fins. We are still talking about the volume. So in terms of volume, the global scale, you can see what's Hong Kong doing. And then in Hong Kong at the moment, we only have one legislation that is related that we can actually monitor or regulate the shark fin trade, which is CITES. So it's not, I really like to work in CITES, but That's the reason, because there's only CITES. So we want more regulation. And if you look at CITES, so Professor Yvonne Sadovy already kindly introduced talking about different CITES work. In Hong Kong, for the CITES, like Appendix 2 species, if you're a live specimen, you need a possession license, which means you can go to a shop, they have to show the license that they are doing things legally. But if you look at shark fins, they're dead specimen. They don't need possession license. So once they only regulate on the international trade level. In the local level, they don't need to do anything. And if we look at the scale of the trade, so this is like picture taken from Peru. You can see thousands of fins are being packed in a bag, and then different bags, they have like thousands, maybe they can have like shipping, putting in the container. There can be 1 million fins in one container coming to Hong Kong. And our custom, sometimes you get lucky like this, you get to see there's a blue shark. That's what they stay in the species. But if that is really true a blue shark, nobody knows. And that's why we need the custom and people to check. And this is exactly what happened taken in Hong Kong, how the custom checking those things. The container came to Hong Kong, they opened the bags, and you can see on the bottom right corner, thousands and thousands of fins actually are there. How do they check and how do they implement CITES? So we need people with special power. So we find people with special power and we develop different things. We work on the visual identification guide and also DNA. In Hong Kong, we work with the government from the custom and the fishery department people because they were the first one to see things are coming in or leaving. So we work with the custom and also the fishery people. We develop like identification guide. We also develop like identification poster that they can put in the border that to see a stepwise approach to actually look for what is legal, what is illegal. And now we're working on DNA to also help them. So we have done different workshops in different years. Basically, you can see every time there's a COP year after the sharks are being listed or upgraded, and we're helping them. And we also provide data, how they come into Hong Kong. And you can see to justify the customs should put more people to look at the sea coming container and also how they re-export. As you can see, most are coming like and going out through the sea container. And after the implementation, since 2014, the first commercial shark species, and so the Hong Kong government actually trying to do something, and you can see the seizures. Now we have more than 40 metric tons of the seizures sitting in Hong Kong. But people look at the graph. Does that mean more illegal trade coming in? Having said that, if you look at the number of shark species being listed, it's also increased. So now what we are trying to do is doing research actually to understand the situation. And you can see this is example, the biggest seizures in 2020, which is in the middle of the pandemic. Thing about the pandemic is so difficult for human to travel, but the illegal trade was still on. And now we're working on research to understand the species composition are being retailed in the local market. And also we want to compare before CITES listing and after CITES listing, what is the effectiveness and how does that work? And if you look at CITES, now all the big fins, like from these pictures, all the big fins, basically they don't have permit, they can't even come in. But we found out in the market, there's something called small fin. And if you look at the left graph, which is the small fin, we use DNA to actually look at the species composition. Male shark and also all the coastal species, they are not listed in CITES, but they can actually mix it with juvenile CITES species coming into Hong Kong. So now we are developing research to understand what's happening. And you can see, as I mentioned, CITES is important. And you can see Hong Kong government trying to do something. But what's beyond CITES? That's why, and partially, we need more regulation. And if you can see also trader are smart. Some of the product, they're just like this. They're trimmed, they're just like tiny, like off-cut trimming, we call. And then they're all coming in. So we also work with the Hong Kong government now to develop DNA work, how to do like real-time PCR to actually look for the illegal species. So, and if you remember, my title is Sharks and After. So not just sharks. I mean, people love them because they're iconic, but how about the other species? Like in the picture, sea cucumber. I remember this is actually taken from a UN CITES meeting. There's a mascot you can see. Clearly, you can see sharks. And on the right-hand side, nobody actually understand what is it. Even we did the whole event, people were actually thinking, is it is it a milk cow or is it something else? But they are actually sea cucumber. They're just very difficult to develop, like even the mascot. People don't pay attention to those non-iconic species. If you look at sharks, try to Google shark t-shirt. You can find scale one, cool one, trend one, baby shark. Try to Google sea cucumber t-shirt. You only come up with these pictures. There's like non-iconic species. They're not in the CITES. But if you look at the trade, this is from 1996, the Hong Kong trade data. Only 38 countries are supporting sea cucumber to Hong Kong. But if you look, time flies, now more than 100 countries actually supporting sea cucumber, or we're importing sea cucumber from there. In the fishery term, there's something called bloom and bust. You finish one country or one area, you go further, you go deeper. This is what's happening with the sea cucumber. And Hong Kong, we are still the bad guy. If you look at the study, we are handling 50% of the like global trade of the sea cucumber, but nobody talks about it. But they actually need help. And then what else? Fish maw. I remember this new coming up. People all talking about the vaquita, which is critically endangered. However, having said that, total harbor fish is also critically endangered, but people pay attention mainly for the vaquita. But how about the fish? And if you look at the fish maw trade, we are talking about 200 million US only in Hong Kong as a fish maw coming into Hong Kong. And the scale, more than 110 countries are actually exporting fish maw to Hong Kong. So you can see there's something more that we need to do beyond the CITES. And only now, if you look at only one single fish maw related species, total harbor, are being listed in CITES. All the others, nobody know what we are trading, nobody know what's happening. And then that's the reason why we love CITES, but we need more. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Stan, for sharing your experiences from a Hong Kong perspective and for very graphically illustrating, which is very important, just how large the scale of the illegal trade is, and also for reminding us that there are so many species that are often overlooked and yet take such a big chunk of the total, or they play a significant part in the illegal trade. So thank you for that. I will quickly turn to Russell Gray, who's our next speaker. Russell leads the global monitoring system under EcoSolve, which is a flagship countering environmental crime initiative under the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime. He oversees a global network of analysts monitoring the illegal wildlife trade online and transforming open source intelligence into actionable insights for law enforcement. So, Russell, welcome, and you have the floor.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you to the organizers for the opportunity to present on this webinar. My name is Russell Gray, and I'm the head of the data component of EcoSolve under the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime. Today, I'll be presenting findings from our global monitoring system and highlighting policy and enforcement needs to address marine wildlife trafficking in the digital age. The digital ecosystem is the new front line of wildlife trafficking, including industrial scale sales of marine species. Over 5.3 billion people use social media, and nearly half of the global population engages in e-commerce. This creates a massive opportunity for cyber-enabled IWT, particularly where regulatory oversights lag behind. The global estimated contribution of e-commerce in 2025 is $4.79 trillion. Approximately half of the world's population are using e-commerce platforms to buy and sell goods, and with significant annual increases in each year, this could very well mean that the digital sales will eventually make up half of all sales globally. I emphasize these current statistics so we can have an understanding that this is a global scale regulatory issue that will only increase over time unless it's addressed early on. My work in EcoSolve is to coordinate the global monitoring system, which is comprised of several analysts or data hubs in countries around the world that monitor online illegal wildlife trade and provide actionable intelligence to national law enforcement agencies. We're currently operating in South Africa, Nigeria, Colombia, Brazil, Indonesia, Thailand, and have partners covering South Asia as a region and MENA region. In addition, we'll have hubs joining us this quarter covering Czechia, Mexico, and Cameroon. I'd also like to briefly mention here that we have a relevant upcoming global trend report on marine and maritime IWT issues, so please watch this space. I'd like to briefly review now some case studies on marine IWT from some of our hubs, the root issues that we're seeing regarding the digital presence, and some solutions to consider. I'd also like to emphasize that while these case studies don't represent isolated incidents, they're simply a placeholder for frequent and increasing problem that we're seeing, many of which are occurring each year in metric tons of trade online. In Indonesia, dried seahorses are openly sold online for traditional Chinese medicine and also as a dried food item. While all hippocampus species are CITES 2 listed, they're not nationally protected. So this mismatch highlights the urgent need for harmonizing national laws and international obligations. Despite being critically endangered and CITES 1 listed, hawksbill turtles were also found listed in Indonesia on Facebook for decorative purposes. Facebook's lack of automated filtering and the absence of proactive enforcement shows how digital platforms are failing marine species. A sperm whale tooth advertised in South Africa demonstrates weak platform enforcement and low species identification capacity. This points to the need for more robust image recognition tools for marine IWT and also a marine IWT keyword watch list to assist both platforms and enforcement. Processed marine products like shark cartilage pills are nearly impossible to trace without mandatory species disclosure. Seemingly all shark cartilage products listed on Facebook and Mercado Libre, for example, from our Colombia hub, are omitting the species entirely. So harmonized regulation and digital trade compliance measures are critical here. There needs to be mandatory transparency on species labels in products such as these, especially in products like fish maw, and also shark oils and shark cartilage, things that can't even be DNA traced. So there's no way to actually tell what the species is. And I also think it's worth noting that in the last 5 years in Colombia, the vast majority of shark imports listed on CITES database were critically endangered species. A critically endangered bowmouth guitarfish was listed online in Thailand. Despite CITES 2 status, sales still occur frequently and openly, and this reflects a pattern we're seeing globally where platform safeguards are weak, enforcement is slow, and public awareness is minimal. So a lot of the time, the public don't even know that it's illegal to buy and sell these species. Dugong tusks, again from Thailand, from CITES 1 listed species. This sale again occurred on Facebook, reinforcing the current moderation policies are not fit for purpose when it comes to high-risk marine species sales. All of these examples illustrate a systemic failure. Platforms aren't detecting protected species, current enforcement efforts on a global scale lack digital capacity, and legal loopholes allow trafficked species to be sold with impunity, especially when they're not listed under CITES, covered by domestic laws, or when domestic policies fail to match international CITES policies. To close these gaps, I would propose 5 priorities. Mandatory and accurate species disclosure on all product labels, platform accountability and improved AI and especially manual moderation, unified global digital trade standards, specific specialized enforcement units with cross-border coordination with a focus on cyber-enabled trade, and consumer education campaigns to reduce the demand for wildlife products and also to educate different nations that are hotspots for this trade on what is legal and illegal to buy and sell. While CITES is essential, it was never designed as a law enforcement treaty. Marine species trafficking is an organized crime, and a new convention against transnational organized crime protocol by the UN addressing this issue would include possibly harmonized criminal definitions, enabled cross-border investigations, mandating species traceability, again, through species labeling, improving DNA capacity for various customs and border agencies, and facilitating intel sharing and prosecution data. Without this legal framework, trafficking continues in blind spots, and especially for unlisted marine species. For example, as previous speakers have mentioned, abalone or sea cucumbers, which are still sold in huge quantities globally. The digital trade in marine wildlife is expanding, and so must our legal and enforcement frameworks. We should begin these actions now because the issues will continue to worsen in the expansion of e-commerce usage. So please feel free to contact me for further collaboration or with the EcoSolve project or regarding the global monitoring system. And thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Russell. I think that's a very important topic to bring to the table, which is we often look at things from the governmental perspective, and we often overlook the role of the private sector in facilitating this trade. So it's very good. It's very important to see also with the pictures that you showed how social media that we use every day are playing a big part on this and the regulatory gaps that allow this to happen. So thank you. And we will, last but not least, hear from our last speaker of the day, who is Dr. Vanessa Perrotta. Vanessa is joining us from Sydney, and she is one of Australia's leading wildlife scientists. Vanessa merges cutting-edge technology with conservation science, from using drones to collect whale snot to developing AI tools to combat the illegal wildlife trafficking. Over the last 5 years, Vanessa has been the chief scientist on an illegal wildlife trafficking detection program in collaboration with Rapiscan Systems, the Taronga Conservation Society of Australia, and the Australian federal government. Thank you so much, Vanessa, for joining, and you have the floor.
Thank you so much, and thank you all so much for joining us. I am the last speaker, so please bear with us if you're staying up late or if you're about to have lunch. Hold on, because I feel like my talk is like a really lovely summary of what the others has spoken about. So let's get into it. And I'm, for those who are joining us who have no idea about this, I always like to start at a very basic level. So consider my talk in this program as very much the summary wrap-up talk. And when we think about wildlife trafficking, which talks to what John said at the start, it refers to all of wildlife, refers to many things. And what the cool kids do these days is consult ChatGPT, and I thought I'd do it the same thing, right? And as you can see, the definitions here listed do cover a few different things. So the key point for this is that often when we think about wildlife trafficking, we always assume that we have a knowledge of the definition, but we might need to revisit that politely. And this is why this platform and next week is so important. And so with that, when we define what illegal wildlife trafficking is, for one of the first papers that we've produced, a simple definition of that would be that deliberate and illegal movement of wildlife across international borders. And so you can obviously hear from my accent, but being an Australian and where we represent is very important when it comes to wildlife trafficking and in other places, because whether you're interested in this or not, we as the entire world should care about it, because the illegal wildlife trade, regardless of what it's in, has a number of different problems that it has associated with it. On the left-hand column, invasive species. So if we remove an animal and place it into another environment, we have a risk of introducing exotics, which is not a good thing. We also know through zoonosis, which many of us are aware of, the potential for animals to pass on things to us. There's also that economic cost. So if we remove things, we could remove important things like disruption for tourism, people's livelihoods. And here in Australia, we're very big, we have a large focus on the agricultural industry. So my key point for this is that wildlife trafficking, regardless if it's marine or terrestrial, it is an important thing because it has a potential to be costly and disrupt livelihoods, but it also may threaten the survival or existence of some species. And so in Australia, we care for wildlife, much like many other countries as well. Our key piece of environmental legislation is all about this, and it's through the Environment Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act that we implement CITES. So this is for the Australian perspective here. We have this key legislation that we adhere to. But as Australians and in Australia, we also have our national and international commitments. So when you're thinking about wildlife trafficking, and I'll get to the marine component in just a sec, I just wanted you to know that we do have these obligations because we care for our marine life, we care for our land as well here in Australia. And so you'll see that our international commitments as Australians does mean that we have to give a hoot about a lot of things, and it's a good thing. And so when it comes to seizures, working out what's coming in, what's going out of Australia, the Australian federal government have a pretty good grasp on this. And you'll see here that I've got the SDG goal 15. Don't freak out. I'll get to 14 in a second. But the key thing here is that we have some sort of an idea of what's being seized. And when we first started this research, it just pointed us to reptiles. And on the left-hand side, there's a shingleback lizard, and I'll explain it in just a second. So this lizard here is a unique species to Australia. Its head looks like its bum deliberately. And as a result, for wildlife trafficking, these animals are very favourable because they're worth a lot overseas and not so much here. So when we had intelligence and knowledge about trafficking examples, reptiles seemed to be the thing we would focus on. And it was through this research where we created world-first algorithms. So essentially, world-first algorithms for the detection of illegal wildlife trafficking for terrestrial species, we started to see the gap for marine life. Okay, so essentially what we've done here using 3D tomography and artificial intelligence, we created algorithms to look for certain things. And in this case, we were able to successfully do this for lizards, but we also had a little bit of a look into marine species as well. So this is a paper, and I can link to it as well, but we've got X-ray scans that we created on a number of different things, and we produced an algorithm to look for what we were looking for. And in this case, fish, we were just doing a simple trial to see what we could find. Now, the bit you've all been waiting for. Whilst we have this new technology in place to detect Australian fauna and flora, the focus has very much shifted to that marine perspective, life below water. Because if you recall what I was talking about, our national obligations, our international obligations, many of these creatures travel the world and can also leave Australia as well. And so if you're completely new to what marine wildlife trafficking is, a number of different things are traded. As we've seen, we've got the wrasse on the right-hand side there, corals, sea cucumbers, shark fins, and seahorses. It's honestly like I knew what everyone else is talking about. This is a lovely summary slide. But this just goes to show that it could be a variety of things. And I'm sure there is some things that I've left out. But if you're new to the whole world, this is the kind of things that can be trafficked. And recently, the seahorses have gotten a fabulous amount of attention because this recent paper which came out from Foster et al. Showed the online reporting of seahorse seizures. And you can see all these movements. Look at this. It's brilliant capturing this. But look at Australia. What's happening there? Now, I know things are happening here, but you know, it's a challenge. And so when we think of Australia and the marine component, Australia does have a huge draw card for marine things to potentially go out of Australia, right? We've got the Great Barrier Reef, and you can see here some little stats. Great Barrier Reef is roughly the same area as Italy. That's pretty big. I know this is an international audience. And we've got a variety of things that could potentially go out as well. And obviously everyone's seen Finding Nemo. Our tropical fish are great, but we don't want to see dories and also marlins, or Nemo rather, going out of Australia. So the thing I want to point to is that there's a gap here in Australia, a knowledge gap. And so when I went back to this seizures table, and this is just for last year, we do have some seizures that represent the marine world, but there's a lot more we need to do. And as you can see on the right-hand side here, that we are working with Interpol. We have the Australian Federal Police, Australian Border Force, and also our state and government territories. But the gaps in knowledge for us here in Australia is really trying to understand what's coming in and what's going out. And the detection capabilities is really the key thing and what we're focusing on in our research. Because without detection, whether it be human or use of artificial intelligence, the knowledge of what we're moving around the world is just not there completely. And we know that already we have detection capabilities, but there's still a lot that is going on that we just don't know about. And so as I summarize my talk, I have 3 key things here that is a call to action. The first is that there's capacity building within Australia for us to also join you around the world to learn more about this, but it does require funding. And it might seem cliche that I'm a scientist requiring funding, but these kind of things do require global effort. And I'm just being very frank with you all. As well as this, there is a gap in addressing key trafficking knowledge. So where are those pathways? What species are involved with this? No one in the world has a complete picture of that. And that's quite scary. And then the other final thing is that why are we talking about illegal wildlife trafficking of marine species at a side event of the United Nations Oceans Conference? Why? So I think tonight and my ending of this session is very much a call to action. And let's hope that this discussion next time is very much taken as part of the main event, because our research of what we're doing here is showing us that it's a very serious problem. And also the other speakers that highlight the concern that many of us all hold. So with that, thank you all for your attention, and I look forward to the discussion on the panel. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vanessa, for showing us or explaining to us the Australian perspective, and also for bringing in a very important point, which is a bit of the overall message we want to get out of the session, which is to bring the issue of the trafficking of marine species to the front and center of this conference next week. And again, as you say, it shouldn't be something that has to be addressed by civil society on the sidelines. It should be front and center as part of the main agenda. So that's hopefully something that we can feed into by having these conversations, and with the follow-up paper that we're going to issue after our event as well. So thank you so much. I am aware that we're running a little bit out of time. So thank you so much to those of you that have stuck with us so far. We did have a Q&A planned, and although we don't have a lot of time, we won't keep you too much longer. We will try to answer maybe one question. I see that some of them have been already answered by our panelists on the Q&A function, but there is one other on the chat. I'll read it out and I'll open the floor to any of our panelists to address it. So it comes from Monica, who had to leave the session, but her question says, monitoring tools for marine species, such as marine ornamental fishes worldwide, which are not CITES listed, i.e. they are not illegally acquired, but maybe nonetheless endangered. I'm assuming that she means whether, I think maybe this is something that Vanessa was kind of hinting at, that we don't have enough monitoring in general of the illegal trade, and that it creates a knowledge gap of not understanding exactly the extent of what is happening and to how many species are actually affected. But I'll open the floor to our panelists and see if any of them want to take this on.
And I might just touch on that. When it comes to detecting items, there are a variety of ways in which animals are seized, as many of you know. So there might be human detection, there might be biosecurity dog detections here in Australia, for example, and there might just be luck of the draw random inspections, or you might be able to have the 3D or 2D X-ray visuals of things. It does require a complementary tool set for detection, in my opinion, but it also requires that collaborative effort for different parties working together. So, and also when it comes to these kind of things, some of this information is held with governments, and so information is not freely available. So there are a number of limitations, but the more we have an understanding of the roots and how things are being detected and in what form, then the more informed we can be going forward to try and do detection. So it's a bit of a tricky answer, but that's my input.
Thank you so much, Vanessa. I see that maybe Russell, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I had a similar response to the Q&A question about CITES listed species, but for ornamental fish species specifically, you would be able to find them online pretty easily, I would assume. And that would make the market trend analysis a little bit easier to detect and find them either on pet shops, e-commerce websites, market forums, or even Facebook. So just getting a scale of the trade and the markets that they're actually present in, and then try to identify the source and destination countries, the width of where they're actually coming from, if they're wild sourced or if they're captive bred. And you can infer that in some cases by how difficult they are to breed, right? And how easy they are to catch. But modeling and market trend analysis like this would probably help to monitor those species. And I think this is something that people really should be looking into, because this is also a blind spot where we don't have CITES regulations on these species because they're just not being monitored.
Thank you so much. I think I'll open the very last question that just came in through our Q&A, and then we will move on to closing remarks. So the question is, how feasible would it be to integrate these mechanisms into existing CITES regulatory frameworks? So perhaps through standardized data sharing protocols or cross-border tech partnerships. Have you come across any pilot projects or case studies where such integrated approaches have already shown results? I believe that was a follow-up question to Russell's answer to one of the previous questions in the Q&A.
Yeah, these mechanisms aren't currently in CITES workflows, but we are trying through the global monitoring system and the EcoSelf project to kind of give a proof of concept that structured monitoring of these issues is possible, at least through the online mechanisms of that. The EcoSelf project also has AI grant facilities and different grant facilities to facilitate technological advances in DNA checks, in other AI capabilities for monitoring and customs inspections, and a few that have been proposed for IUU monitoring. So I would say that ours is kind of a structured model of this, like as a case study. And again, we have a global trend report relevant to this topic that will be coming out on the 11th of this month. So that will provide a little bit more information.
Thank you, Russell. So we are unfortunately over time, so I will quickly give the floor back to John, who I believe has a few closing remarks. So yeah, over to you, John.
Great, thank you, Anna, and a big thanks to everyone who's joined us online today and for your questions, and to our colleagues for answering them just then, but also you'll see there are some written answers in the Q&A function there as well. But let me just express huge thanks to our speakers today. What extraordinary presentations we had the benefit of today. So rich, so well presented, and the tech support was fantastic. I've not seen something go so smoothly like this for a long time, but really just brilliant presentations. I'm so happy that we've recorded this event, because we're going to make it available far and wide. It will go on the ADM Capital Foundation YouTube page, but we'll make it available to all. As mentioned at the start, we're also going to prepare a statement capturing the essence of today's event, the main messages, and we will seek to feed that into the conference coming up in Nice next week. As Vanessa said, we would hope that we would not be a side event, and we're a virtual side event as well, but we would be embedded into the core of future UN Oceans conferences, because this is such a critically important issue. But what we've had the opportunity to do today is to draw attention to it, and we'll continue to do that through the release of the statement and the video itself. Huge thanks to our co-sponsors. Huge thanks to the tech support from ADM Capital Foundation. And Anna, great thanks to you as well for moderating us so well today. Really appreciated. But to all of our speakers, brilliant, really appreciated. And I'd just like to end by wishing you all a very happy World Environment Day. And we look forward to working together to carry these issues forward, not just to the UN Oceans Conference next week, but to the ones coming up in future years, but also into these UN processes that I mentioned earlier in my remarks. So huge thanks. Appreciate it.
Thank you again. Thank you, John. Again, thank you to the distinguished panelists that we had today, and also to our audience for attending, for the questions, and for staying on a bit longer. I think it's very clear that the overall message of today is that we need increased regulations, not only at the national, but at the international level. and that an additional protocol to the UNTOC is one of those ways in which we can address some of those gaps. So thank you again for all the inputs today and the expertise that you've shared with us, and we'll be following up with making the recording available as well as the action points for this event. Happy World Environment Day, everyone. Thank you for joining us, and have a great rest of your day. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Anna and John.
Thanks. Bye.
Cheers.
Thank you. Thank you.